Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to our second webinar of the year, brought to you by Business Entrepreneurship and Private Sector Engagement Community of Practice, abbreviated as BEPSE, which my colleague will talk about more. I am Giacomondi from Kenya, specifically Nairobi, and I am the youth advisor for this community of practice. And this webinar is entitled, is a follow-up of the previous webinar that we conducted around March about labor market assessment. And this webinar is specifically targeting the localized labor market assessment process, which is a process and not a product. Next. So as I had mentioned, I'm Giacomondi, a youth advisor, and my colleague, Scholar Lara Goldmark, who is the co-champion of this COP. And most of you who are members of this COP knows Lara and me. At this moment, I would like to request my colleague and co-champion Lara Goldmark to proceed with the more introduction. Thank you, Lara.
There we go. Thank you so much, Jack. Welcome and thank you for being here, everybody. This is a really fun session to be in. This year, we've decided to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive on labor market assessments. And some of you may remember our last session. I just wanted to recap for those here for the first time this year, that what we're doing is we're looking at a tool that was developed by a project that I actually led a number of years ago called Workforce Connections. And Rachel Bloom was my client for that project. She worked at USAID at the time. And there's kind of a joke about the framework that it was, and it really was, drawn on a napkin in a bar after a training session. And the framework that we developed at that time, I think, was quite different from anything else that was out there. I know because we had done kind of a landscape study of what was out there. It's a comprehensive framework. It has modules. So the idea is to look at trends around economic growth, to possibly look at policy issues, to map stakeholders. It also does include a whole set of questions about youth and, almost includes a youth assessment within it. And Rachel made sure that that part was in there. She left USAID, moved out to California, and has been working with EDC, and they have been evolving the tool just as many organizations took the tool into their own direction in, what worked for them in terms of their programming. So today's conversation, I guess I'm going to ask you guys to ask questions, try to understand more, be critical. One of my questions is whether this approach that they have is actually a subset of this larger tool, or it's really a different thing. And so let's hear what they have to say. We have our three speakers, Rachel, who I've just introduced. We have Fanuel, who is the head of an institution in Rwanda called the African Evangelistic Enterprise. It's a Christian local youth organization that works with children and youth empowerment, and he leads the livelihoods and youth empowerment practice. And we also have Chris Murray from South Africa, who's a technical advisor for EDC. So on that note, thank you so much, everybody. And Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. So Stephanie, you're going to be navigating the slides for me, so hopefully you can keep up. We're going to just go on to the next slide. So to start, I'm just going to present this one slide and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, but I just wanted to share with you kind of a framework for how we at EDC are thinking about LMAs. And as Laura mentioned, there's different kinds of labor market assessments. I mean, really what I wanted to first kind of point out was labor market assessments are basically just a way of collecting and sharing data so that people can make decisions. And when we think about who's involved in workforce development, there are different stakeholders and they're making different kinds of decisions. So they're going to have different data needs. And so what might be useful data, for example, for a government minister in a capital city, is not necessarily useful for a local TVET provider in a rural area. That person is going to have different data needs. And so EDC started to develop this framework for approaching these different data needs, and it helps us understand what kind of assessment is needed for a particular purpose. I should say that this framework is still in development. So if you do have feedback, we welcome it. And anyone who wishes to share in the chat, your thoughts or impressions, feel free to do so. So at the top of this framework is what we simply call labor market assessments. And Stephanie, if you click on the next slide, this concept of labor market assessment is really just what most people think of when they think of labor market assessment, and it refers to an assessment that generates national or regional level data about employment or growth trends. So this kind of assessment is useful when you want to know what are the jobs being generated across a country, what industries are we finding jobs growing, or broadly speaking, what kinds of skills are needed to meet the growing demand in a particular region. So who uses that information? If you go to the next slide, this data is mostly used to set policy or to design national level programs. It's often commissioned out by government ministries or by international donors who want to put money into workforce development. We find that there are a lot of tools out there. The tool that Lara mentioned in the beginning that she and I worked on, that was largely intended for USAID and for program design purposes. And it kind of fell within this spectrum of looking sort of broadly and at the national level on employment trends. I believe they spoke about this kind of LLMA during the last webinar that we had last month. And I think Stephanie's going to share the link to that webinar in the chat, so you can go back to that webinar. And then there's a second kind of LMA that we see at EDC, which is what we call local labor market assessment. And this is what we're going to focus on today in our webinar. And the reason that we make this distinction at EDC is that because we found that the existing labor market tools that were out there in the internet and the ethersphere, they were very useful for generating national level data on employment trends, but we were finding that our local implementing partners that we were working with needed more information to help them make decisions and implement programs on the ground. We found that they often needed much more highly localized data on the employment trends in their particular region that were appropriate for the kinds of young people that they were serving. And also they needed more immediate data. So rather than maybe looking at 5 or 10-year job projections, they were more interested in how do we place young people now or within the next year or the next 2 years? And how do we connect young people to those jobs? And so at EDC, we started to work with local partners to develop labor market assessment tools that were useful for them. And that's what we're going to talk about. But before I turn it over to my colleagues, I just want to acknowledge that there's this other kind of labor market assessment, which we call youth-led community mapping, or it could be youth-led assessments. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is a very targeted way to engage young people in understanding the opportunities available to them. I'm not going to talk about youth-led community mapping today. Maybe that'll be a topic of a future BEPSE webinar, but I did want to just mention it and just say that does play a role in decision-making, particularly for young people. So anyway, the main point here is that all these different sources of labor market information, they do play important roles, but they're different roles. And they're different roles for different kinds of actors within a workforce development system. But they don't exist in isolation. They really do build upon one another. And all of that kind of information is needed for workforce services to be effective and in order to align workforce services with demand. And I also want to say that it doesn't end with a fancy report or presentation, but that it really is part of a larger decision-making process, and that there are follow-up actions that are needed after the fact. So with that little teaser, I'm going to hand it over to Chris Murray, and he's going to introduce what are local labor market assessments and how we use them.
Hi, thanks, Rachel. And Rachel, you hear me clearly? Just checking.
I do hear you. Yes, you're great.
Good. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name's Chris, and I'm coming to you from South Africa, based in South Africa. And I've worked extensively with EDC across a number of projects. And we've been doing local labor market assessments in many of them. As you'll see on the slide, this first slide starts talking about the fact that it's around connecting local system actors So it's not just someone going out and doing research, but building connections, building a supply of skills, and an opportunity to understand where the demand for jobs are at a local level. So it's a joint exercise, it's participatory, it's around talking to people and building relationship and strengthening a relationship, strengthening those local connections as you understand it. Because as Fennell will talk about later, as a local service provider, he wants to understand his local community, he wants to build relationship in his local community, but he also wants to have some labor market understanding. And so it helps an organization like AEE better understand that skills gap. And then because they're a service provider working with youth, and AEE has worked on our Rwanda program for a number of years, where we've trained our service providers to do these local labor market assessments, they're then much better prepared to be able to prepare the youth better and know what kind of local initiatives we're preparing youth for. And then again, importantly, and as you'll hear from Fennell later as well, it's something that gives us data that's relevant for youth. Often, as Rachel said, some of the bigger assessments that are done are very high level, and the data is not relevant for youth. It's not at the local street level. It's kind of city or even national level, and the local labor market assessment that we're working at is trying to be more at the local community level with data that's then useful for youth as well as for the local service provider as well. So let's look at the next slide. And here again, we talk even more around the fact that this is around us building the capacity of that local organization. So the approaches of this local labor market assessment are that we spend quite a lot of time working with a local organization. In Fennell's case or AE's case, they were one of up to 20 different local organizations that we worked with on our projects in Rwanda. We've done similar work in the Philippines at the moment. We are now taking the work we've been doing in the Philippines and taking it a level up to youth development alliances that Fennell will talk about. We've done similar work in Niger, where we've worked at a really local level and probably almost at a youth level. So we've been using this tool and instrument in different places. And recently we've just used a similar tool in Liberia to get an understanding of the local needs. And so as it says here, it uses a simple instrument. It uses, and Fennell will show you some, it uses a low-cost methodology. It works with local actors and includes youth sometimes. And it's very much a participative approach that builds relationship with service providers, builds a relationship with the industry that we're talking to, the big and the small businesses that we talk to. It's not a large number of interviews. It's not a huge, big instrument that we work with. We talk a lot around them having a conversation with the people that they're researching, rather than going through a list of questions. And so we train our researchers quite carefully to go from one question to the next and follow the conversation. And as you see here, it gives us a manageable amount of data. Often a labor market assessment gives you just too much data. Often I will say to people, if we're trying to collect all of this information, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to capture it? How are we going to use it? And so our kind of debrief process is one of gathering data that's useful to the organization and useful to the youth on the ground as well. On the next slide, you'll see some of who we talk to. So we start by talking to, we have instruments and tools to talk to employers. We have instruments and tools to talk to local government officials, asking them what's happening in their areas, who else they can recommend that we talk to. We talk a lot with self-employed and small business owners because our youth often are going to find work or livelihoods in that sector. If we can, we talk to business associations or chambers of commerce. We do talk to training providers and find out what they are providing, but we also try and understand the gaps. And a big part also is to do youth focus groups and get the youth to do inputs. We talk to youth that are employed, youth that are unemployed, youth that are still studying, youth that are doing small business. And so the information we get from here, as I said, is manageable. It's information that we can do something with. So we look at and identify high demand sectors or high demand value chains. We listen to employers about soft skills and hard skills, and the employers often are talking to us more around the soft skills, and often saying that's the biggest gap for them. They can train the hard skill, but they struggle to change the attitude of youth. And so that's something that they're encouraging, they're looking for, and that helps us as we prepare youth better. It looks for entry-level opportunities. So we're not looking for highly qualified, highly skilled people because we're working with youth. And so it's looking at what are those entry-level jobs, what are those entry-level opportunities, economic trends in the local community, what's improving, what's growing, what are the opportunities. We as I said earlier, we listen to government, local government on the ground, government in the communities. We look for youth initiatives. Where are they working with youth? And then we ask and talk to skills training providers and find out, so what is it you're training? What are your challenges in training this? How many of your youth are absorbed? Do you do any workplace-based training for the youth? Do you have a relationship with local businesses? What if we built that relationship for you? We also get youth, the perceptions of the youth through the focus groups of what they want, but also the kind of training they get, their interests, their experience, how they've tried to find work. So it's very practical, very much asking them, what can we do to do it better at this local level? And then it's resources for youth to think about what they need, because if we're going to take this back to the youth, we need to think, well, how are we going to share it back with the youth? How are we going to give them information that's useful for them? How are we going to give them relevant information? So as you see on the approach is very much localized, very much around building capacity of the local organization, very much working with an organization so they can do it again and again, very much so that it's something that once we've worked with AEE, Fennell and his team can continue to do this again and again, because next year they will get more, next year they will get better information, next year they will know how to do it better. So we're going to turn it over to Fennell now, and he's going to talk about how they've used it in AEE on some of our projects and other projects in Rwanda. So thanks, Fennell.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for this explanation about local labor market assessment. Something I would like to share with the audience before I talk on the slides is that is a very good instrument which helps you to adapt to local context. So it helps you to contextualize or to bring down those statistics at regional and the national level up to the community level. But again, with local labor market assessment process, it engages beneficiaries, which are the end users of information, youth. Youth will be beneficiaries of intervention. So once they do participate in this process, this also it's very important, because once you interact with them, what your intervention is coming to solve will be beneficial and also will sustain. So now back to the slides. As one of the way we do conduct local labor market assessment, it enables the AEE to know, to understand opportunities in a community, but again helps us to build relationship at the community level. It also helps us to better plan our intervention and tailor them to the needs of the beneficiaries. So as we started the local labor market assessment, one thing I can also say is that it does not engage many human resources. The example is there. We only need a team of 3 to 4 people from our staff in a given district. So we conducted 2 to 3 days training, and together the team is coached, is equipped. They can do local labor market assessment. without a lot of resources. So after training the local team, we together train team, identify different stakeholders to talk to and to work with. Because in a given district or in a given community, you have different interventions, you have different stakeholders, including government and public sector. So we make sure that we identify all those stakeholders and different platforms which can give you much information about youth livelihood. Then at the field, we do conduct focus group discussion among the youth and the interview with different employers. The local labor market assessment, one of the particularity of it, it does not take long. Like for instance, in a given district, it can be between 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how large the district is, how many sectors are in a district. That is also something I would like to highlight as far as local labor market assessment is concerned. It does not it is not time consuming. 2 to 3 weeks, you are done with it. Again, once data are collected, they are compiled using Excel sheets, and they are categorized depending on Sorry.
No,
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you, Fanuel. Feel free to turn off your
Yes.
video in case that helps with the audio.
Okay, I can turn off. Okay, thank you. At some
That's
point,
better.
the internet was weak. Yeah, thank you. So as I said, once we do correct data, the reporting also is done by the team. We do not need external people to come and compile a report. So the report is also done in a simplified format, which will be accessible and affordable to different users. From that report, the report is shared with the different stakeholders, as I will share and explain to the next slide. Next. Before I talk about how we do share or do dissemination of the local labor market assessment report, as I said previously, when we do conduct local labor market assessment, we have quite a number of tools which are adapted to the types of stakeholders. So those are generic questions which help the researcher to better understand each stakeholder. For instance, on my left, we are on the left, those are the questions for employers. Then on right, you have also question for small business group agencies. So as you can read this through, those are designed to better understand the environment in which any stakeholders will be operating in. For instance, if you ask an employer, the employer will tell you which skills they need, which types of employees they need, what are the required skills, what is the experience they are expecting from the employees. Then from the responses, we are able to know what can we offer to our youth so as to respond to the needs of the employers. Then on the right side, there are also questions for small business supporting agencies. Like for instance, today, we have many agencies, have many projects, have many stakeholders who are supporting entrepreneurship and the small businesses. But to understand their interest, to understand what they need, so we need to interact with them. So this questionnaire helps the researcher to understand better what the support businesses group needs, what they expect from youth or from the local government organization. And when you are planning your intervention, it serves as an eye opener to you, and you design intervention that are needy based. Next. So conducting the local labor market assessment itself, that it is not sufficient, it is not enough if there is no way to communicate, to disseminate the results to the users. So one of the users of the local labor market assessment results are youth. So in the AEE, once we are done with the local labor market assessment, we make sure that we meet again with youth and we communicate the results. So we do not present the whole report, because a report can be of 20 or 30 pages, but we do summarize, we summarize the results, we do flyers, and we present it ideas on flip charts during youth meetings. So youth can now understand in the meeting, but go back again with the flyers and share results with their fellow youth who have not been able to participate in the meeting. So the first end users of the local labor market assessment results are youth. Then secondly, we share the results with different platforms we are operating, the government and the Youth Development Alliance. Youth Development Alliance is a platform or a strategy that was supported or introduced by EDC as a way to sustain our interventions. So it groups all people or stakeholders working in youth empowerment. We do also conduct a stakeholder workshop. We discuss report, we discuss results, and each stakeholder can see his role to play. Again, we have the private sector bodies. Here in Rwanda, we used to have the government as big employer, but the tendency, the objective of the government orientation of our economy is to increase the participation of the private sector in the economy of the country, to be the big employer. So once we disseminate and share results, make sure we also work with the private sector, because they are consumers of our products. They are consumers of our work. That's why we make sure we also interact and share with them the results. Then they can also align their intervention or their businesses. Again, we don't limit ourselves to the government and the private sector. We also share reports with other development players, and like JAF is a joint development forum at the district, which comprises of stakeholders in youth empowerment and the other domain, so as to have a better coordination. We have had also a very good approach as youth empowerment players. When we are working in a district or in a sector, we have an approach of one voice, one image. So if A is operating in a district and there is a 2 or 3 local NGOs, when we are presenting local labor market assessment results, A does not go there alone, because even when we conduct local labor market assessment, it's a joint exercise. So we are promoting one voice, one image as one people intervening in youth empowerment. Next. Here, those are some of the photos we have captioned showing how we do share results of the local labor market assessment. On the left, you will see a photo. It's a group of youth people and one of our staff sharing results from the local labor market assessment. Youth are very interested to know, to write and also understand what are the opportunities, because the local labor market assessment, as I will talk in my next slide, helps to merge or to match youth interests and opportunities. Then on the left photo, you will see a photo of stakeholders meeting, discussing on the local labor market assessment results or report. So that's why we said we make sure that we do not only produce report, but again, we make sure the report is disseminated, and it helps people to understand and to align their intervention. Basically, with the local labor market assessment, it leads to better design youth empowerment intervention. It helps youth to make their choice, because by the opportunities there, by the interest there, they can make better choice. Again, youth are given relevant information about their community. There might be some opportunities in a particular area, but given that there is no clear way to communicate, youth continue to live in isolated environment. So local labor market assessment helps, also is a very good channel for information sharing. It's again also help matching the demand and the offer. Like for AEE, working with youth, we are in a position to tailor our interventions. Maybe we do agri-based activities, instead of doing those off-farm activities, depending on how and the results of the local labor market assessment. And again, for the district, it helps to better coordinate other development players, because they know priority in their district, they know opportunities, but also they know the gaps as far as youth empowerment and livelihoods are concerned. Next. Then finally, the local labor market assessment is of good help for many development players, being the public sector, the government, the private sector, but also it helps to improve on policy and programming. As we said, it enhances private sector engagement and coordination of intervention. It helps the district or the government at the local level to sharpen, to tailor their plans to the needs, to the context. And again, it helps different players to channel their intervention, and it avoids duplication and misuse of resources. Rather, there is resource leveraging. But again, with private sector engagement as one of the strategies to tackle youth unemployment, we realize that local labor market assessment is a very good tool, is a very good approach to engage both the private sector and the public sector to come on board as far as youth empowerment and youth livelihood are concerned. Next, and I welcome my colleague to go with the next slide.
Chris, I'm going to turn it to you for this slide.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I just was trying to unmute.
Okay.
Cool. So I'm back on, and thank you very much, Fennel, for that. As you'll see, in terms of, as you will have heard, it's very much a participative driven process where the local staff are the people that are doing the work. So as I said right at the beginning, it's not something that has a a big research team or professional researchers, but local staff that gather the information, and it really gives us greater relevance and greater local ownership for the local partners that are doing this. The youth voice also comes through very strongly because we're talking to youth that know us, or youth that are in the community, and we're often, organizations like FNL are very good at working with youth. So we hear that youth voice, we hear the challenges and the concerns of youth. The focus groups are very, very relevant and are a large part of the data gathering. And as I said, although some of the instrument is simple, we spend quite a lot of time listening to youth voices and really making sure that that is strong. So as I said, as I closed earlier, the capacity of AE has increased, the capacity of other organizations we work with in Rwanda have increased, the organizations that we work with locally in other countries increases, and they can gradually gather more and more data. The reports that they generate have much more depth over years, much more relevance as well. For example, in Rwanda, what we started saying was, so our local partner delivery organizations had to submit a labor market assessment every year, and against that we contracted them to do the kind of work that was relevant in their community. So they wouldn't just say, we're going to do plumbing training, but we're going to do training that is relevant because we can see a demand, because youth are asking for it. So much more of a relevant report and much more relevant data. The debriefing is not really quantitative, it's much more qualitative, and I'll say a bit more at the end. It's a conversation with the researchers. It's around what works, what did you see that was good, what did you see that are challenges, how do you think this fits, what did the local organizations say to you? So there's a large amount of time spent, not a large amount, as Fennell said, you saw pictures of it, just talking to the researchers and gathering much more of a qualitative and relationship driven set of data. I love photographs that we see when we do these. Often my WhatsApp is just clouded with photographs coming in. And so the local partner identifies really good relationships, good opportunities, good youth initiatives, good partners to work with in terms of employers, good employers that we can channel our youth to. We empower our youth to go out, the youth that are trained to go and find workplace for themselves. So really it is much more around getting youth employable, and so the information that we give just makes that much more accessible. We are trying to work at how to broaden this in countries like in the Philippines. We're trying to work at how we work with local youth development agencies and other stakeholders. We're trying to work with how we build some of this into government type organizations, departments of labor, or the TVET system organizations in terms of the research they do. So that's kind of some of our next step. We're also working at how we get much more of a qualitative data set. You know, people like Rachel come in way above my head and will say to me, so, you know, how many jobs are there? How many jobs at this level? Or what are the skills gaps? And so those are the challenges when you don't have big research organizations, but they really are, you know, it's something that we're working towards. So at the moment, just responding to the chat quickly, is that we've been doing labor market assessments, as I said, in Philippines. We've done quite a few across in our projects in Africa at the moment, in Ethiopia, in Rwanda, in Liberia, in Niger. We're not working in the Philippines at the moment, though. So yeah, that's some of the takeaways, and I think we're going to questions from here, and Rachel will moderate some of those questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Fanuel. So I am going to invite all of you in this conversation to feel free to ask questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you. And Stephanie, I might ask you to just help me if I'm missing someone who might be raising their hand. I'm going to actually, one thing I just want to, that I find interesting, I'm just going to say, is that this really is a systems approach to doing labor market assessments. I find this really interesting because it really is about engaging local stakeholders on the ground. And I really take to heart what Fanuel was saying about that this is really an entry point for developing relationships. So he mentioned the youth development alliances, which are these public-private partnerships at the local level. It's a way of building relationships with the private sector by going in and asking them about what their skills gaps are. He talked about the one voice approach of working with other service providers and coordinating with them and sharing information. So I find that really interesting, that whole systems approach. What I also found interesting was just, the points that both Chris and Fanuel made about the fact that this is a very simple, low cost, manageable process. So it really is meant to be used by those who are going to be taking that information and applying it to their work. And then also that it's repeated over time. Before we start looking at the other questions from all of you, I just want to ask Fanuel, this concept of repeating the labor market assessment over time, how many times have you at AE done this labor market assessment approach? And how has the process changed for you since the first time you did it? So how has it changed over time? In what ways have you guys changed what you've done about labor market assessments?
Okay. Thank you. We do conduct local labor market assessment each year. So because we are convinced that after 1 year, many things has happened in a community. There are new opportunities, or the opportunities that were there last year are no longer there. So you do update your database. Or as we said, it's also time for to build relationship with different stakeholders. There should be some new stakeholders who have come on board and others who have left. So we do conduct local labor market assessment every year. And if we are still having the same intervention, we do update. So we do update our data to make sure what we are doing is accurate and are updated. And one of outcome of the local labor market assessment in our practice as the AEE is that, for instance, we were working in Huye for over like 3 years, and many youths were requesting to be trained after the life skills. Many were taking a pathway to do professional training in tailoring. Then at the end of the day, when they are done with the course, there were many at the market and could not find jobs. There were no demand. Then we ask ourselves, why are we training many young people, and still when you go back there, we find them unemployed? So the local labor market assessment was a response to us, because it has revealed that there are opportunities in agri-based activities. Then from those results, we were able to orient youth in the agribusiness. So that is one of the things I can highlight as a result of conducting local labor market assessment. It helps you to adjust, to align your plan, your intervention with the needs in a particular community. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions about which countries this labor market assessment, the local labor market assessment, has been used. I'm going to just put it in the chat in writing to address that question. But we have actually an interesting question about gender and social inclusion, and whether any of those considerations was included in this process. So gender-related factors or other social inclusion considerations. Chris or Fanuel, I'm going to let you answer that question.
Yeah, so again, depends on where we're doing it and what it's for, Rachel. Number one, we try and make sure that a high percentage of our researchers are women, so that we have that kind of lens in what we are looking at. Some of the focus groups are girls only, women's only, young girls only focus groups. We recently, and I don't know a lot of information, we recently just done in Rwanda a labor market assessment that particularly focused on disability, and I think there was a gender lens on that as well. So it had a very strong focus. I wasn't involved in it and I haven't seen a report yet. So yes, it is something we have built in and we are building in more.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Maybe one simple things to add on, apart from gender consideration, inclusion in consideration, we do also consider disability inclusion when we are doing local labor market assessment, especially when we are working with youth. That's also a consideration to make.
Great. I want to ask a question about sort of some of the challenges or trade-offs. So, Chris, you mentioned, you're looking at working at more robust data, and Fanuel, you talked about how this is a very simple process, and it's meant to, really be, available and low cost and manageable. What are some of the trade-offs with that approach? What are some of the challenges that you find, and sort of how are you working to address some of those challenges?
Fanel, you want to go first?
Yes, I can go first with supplement. Some of the challenges we encounter, as we said, is the people's understanding of local labor market assessment with those robust surveys and research, because people have this bias on research. They say research are done, surveys are done, books are written, and they are put in shelves. They are never utilized. So understanding of local labor market assessment as something which is contextualized and ready to be used is a challenge to some people, because there is that tendency to have a survey for a long period, waiting for results, and sometimes written in a language many people do not understand. So the first challenge is people's mindset about research, about survey. That's one. Two, the second challenge I can highlight is the sometimes in our community, when you are doing a research or conducting a labor market assessment, if it is not properly done, it may raise expectation. And whatever was highlighted in the report, whatever was highlighted as gaps in a particular community, people may think your intervention will come and respond to them. So that is a challenge in the community. But again, one of the ways to counter it is to make sure you properly communicate what you are intending, the objective of your exercise, and the end use of the results. Those are some of the challenges I can highlight, but Chris can also share some.
Rachel, was that enough? Or do you want to say the question again?
I mean, it's good. If you have anything to add, feel free. I actually think you mentioned mindset, Fanuel, and about research. And I remember you mentioning to me at one point about when you communicate back with government about how important the research methodology is to them. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
I was muted. Yeah, for the research methodology, like as I said, when some people are understand research as a robust survey, and with the methodology, they want to see people with very high profile, with very high education background. So the first thing to do with government, local government, and other stakeholders is to let them understand what the local labor market assessment is. It is not a robust survey. it is intended to match local opportunities with the local demand. And it does not require many resources. It does not require high profile people, but trained people with basics. So as I said, the introduction of the exercise, make it understood by the local government and the other stakeholders that the step is very important for them. Otherwise, some may compare it with national census or other national surveys that take place on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question here. Actually, I want to say that we have a couple of questions about people interested to know about how they learn about this methodology and the tools. Chris, I don't know if you have anything more to add than what I'll say, but these tools have been developed really at that project level. We have not collectively taken these tools and made them sort of more globally or generalized available for the public, although we do hope to be able to consolidate our learnings and to develop some kind of tool, but right now they're not publicly available. We also have questions about sample reports from these LLMAs. So as Fanuel mentioned, we don't generate reports per se from that this really is more about communicating findings with local stakeholders on the ground. And so we use things like flyers and maybe presentations or whiteboards to communicate that, but not necessarily a report. I'm not aware of an actual LLMA report, and correct me if I'm wrong. And I should also say that these LLMAs are done in multiple districts. So while Fanuel represents AEE, and he talked, for example, about doing it in Huye, which is in a district in Rwanda, there are other implementing partners. So Chris mentioned that we have 20 implementing partners who are doing this all throughout Rwanda. So they're all doing it in their specific local area. So with that, there's another question here about, let's see, from Sharka. About how are these local LLMAs connected with the national LLMA results? So are there any conversations that or platforms that could connect what is happening at the local level with national level data?
You're looking to me?
I don't know. Fanuel, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I have two answers. Firstly, one is that when we started in Rwanda with labor market, first we did a national labor market assessment. So we got national level data. We used that to say to the NGOs, organizations we were working with, here's what's national, but you need to go to a local and drill down from there. So it was that reverse order. In the Philippines, in three areas, we're not working so much with national, but more at a regional or a hub level, and trying to work out how we work with that regional, those big youth development alliances, or with, as I said, the TVET networks or other networks. We work with the mayor's office, I think, in one of just trying to say, how do you better do your labor market, because they all do labor market, but they don't often get out into the field to do it. They kind of say, well, this is what we think. This is what we think we see, but we don't actually always research it. We sit in a room and talk about what we think is important. And so we're trying to get them to take some of our methodology and embed that in their methodology. So it would, at a regional level, help them to drill down at a local level. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. We're running close to time. I just want to summarize a couple of takeaways that I have found from learning about this process. One is that this is really not a one-off process, that this really is, doing local labor market assessments. It's a locally led process, so it's carried out by those who are using the data. And that it's really just a process of iteration and continuous learning. So that's really interesting to me, is that it's just understanding about how labor markets change over time. And as Fanuel mentioned, they do it from year to year, and they find that different findings over that time. And so that labor market assessment process helps them inform from year to year what they're doing. What also is interesting to me is the importance of communications. And, Fanuel said, doing an LLMA is not enough if there isn't a way to communicate it across multiple stakeholders. So that's really interesting, is thinking about, for all of us, how do we, once we do LLMAs, how do we communicate that across the stakeholders who are going to use that data? And then finally, that, how are we going to apply that data, right? So it's implied that once we do a local labor market assessment, that people are going to be taking a certain set of actions, and there might be a certain set of capacity development or other supports needed to make that happen. So it's really about sort of how you translate that data into action. Anyway, I just want to thank our speakers, Chris, Murray, Fanuel, Cindy Dibaya. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I thought this was really interesting. For me, I learned a lot. This is the first time I've actually sort of had this kind of formal conversation from our Rwanda partners. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Laura and Jack for closing comments and wrap up.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Fanuel and Chris and everybody who was here. This was a great session. It's really excited to see how we're sort of able to build on this conversation and go deeper each time. And especially the fact that this particular conversation was so field-based. And it's one of the things that we've noticed is that that's what people really want to know about. And they want to know about examples and tools and where it's been used. I want to encourage you guys to follow up with us on, Rachel, when you said, for example, that these things aren't publicly available, since they were produced for a USAID project, I wonder if EDC might make some things available, but I'd also love to help find resources, right, to really turn them into a tool. So this may be something that could come out of the community of practice. So I'd love to hear from other folks too on ideas like that. And share with us also, I see people here from other organizations, if you guys have different approaches to doing this. We'd love to invite you to share your approach. We have a couple of different events lined up for the next few months, but I think there's a number of organizations that have really taken this tool in different directions. So yeah, thank you for this slide, Stephanie. These are some of the upcoming events. And Jack, I'm going to pass it over to you if you're still there to say goodbye to everybody. And Ovodi, thank you so much for your translation. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you, Rachel and the team, for that great presentation about localized labor markets. And I would like to inform you that this webinar was recorded, and you can find it later on Youth Power platform, especially on the BEPSE platform. And there is a way in which we can connect together on the Youth Power platform. So if you have not joined the Youth Power platform, kindly go to your browser and type www.youthpower.org. After that, you will find on the dashboard a button on register. After registration, kindly connect and join the different COPs, particularly the youthpower.org, the BEPSE COP, which Stephanie has put on the chat. So thank you so much. See you soon, maybe in June. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.